Do you want to be a better communicator? Today we're going to take a look at some lessons from the book Supercommunicators and see what we can take away from that to help improve your communication success and abilities. Excited to get started with that. This is the Talk to Me PDD podcast. I'm your host, PDD. We talk about management, leadership, AI, and the role of technology in our world today. So today is episode 30. And we're going to talk about listening for conversational cues and also being a super communicator in general. There's lots of different frameworks for communication. One of the things that I noticed or I faced sort of earlier in my career is that I would hope that people would just tell me directly what they wanted and sometimes get frustrated when they didn't. And just the world would be a whole lot easier if people just told us exactly what they wanted us to do and not kind of went around in other directions. But as I've had more experience and learned why that happens, I've learned that there's sort of no way around that, and you have to adapt your conversation techniques and also, and probably most importantly, your listening techniques to look for signals that will help you get to the bottom of what the real meaning or the real ask is in a conversation. So we'll get to those in a minute. There are different frameworks that people use. I like the one on Supercommunicators, but any of them can work well. And thinking about different sort of structured points in the conversation. In this book, they break it down to just sort of three different types of conversations. So the first one, what's this really all about, is when the people in the conversation, whether it's one-on-one or in a group, are trying to all align and figure out what they're talking about and what they're trying to accomplish. This could be around decision making, trying to move forward as a group and trying to get to consensus. So that's one area, one type of conversation. The second one, and I think probably the most important and maybe the most neglected, is the how do we feel about, or just how do we feel conversation, the emotional mindset part of the conversation. And this plays just such a dramatic impact on how we're able to communicate, where people's emotional state is, and how that affects their communication and trying to get to the real meaning behind things. And there may often be an emotional meaning or a set of feelings associated with different topics. And if we're not able to listen to that and factor those in, we're missing a lot of information in the communication, and likely missing some of the real intent behind the communication that needs to happen. And then the third type of communication that they mention in Super Communicators is more on the social side, the who are we conversation, how we identify as a group, the values that we have, things along those lines. So different conversations can move throughout these three different areas. And with any of the frameworks for conversations or thinking about it, just understanding that you're moving through different types of conversations, and within each of those, there's different opportunities to get clarity and to align. And it's often looked at as sort of this looping behavior within that, where the conversation participants need to do some active work to get on the same page, to figure out, where in the conversation life cycle they are, or what type of conversation they're having. And then within that, sort of iterating as well to get to clarity on what is actually being communicated or what needs to be communicated, or where is their understanding that needs to get more clarity. So that's it, sort of a little bit of a preview from the book there. Now I'm going to go into some of the conversational cues that I'm listening for personally that I've found helpful sort of in my life and work. And there's one piece. The first one is being able to try and pick up on these cues and look for information there. And then the second part is acting on them in an appropriate way. So there's two sides of it. If you notice, that's a good first step. But in some of these situations, especially if there's a sort of emotional component or sensitivity, sometimes you can be hesitant to act. So it's having the courage and having the techniques to approach some of these conversations in a way that can be effective and can land well when there might be sensitive topics at play. So the first one that I have is that throwaway lines are often an opportunity to sort of go in and dig deeper and ask for more information. So let's say you're having a conversation with a colleague and they seem a little frazzled or overwhelmed, and they're just like, oh, things, I'm just so busy, and that sort of thing. And that's a very common thing for people to say. So it might be easy just to let that go. But that's often an opportunity to ask for more, and to dig in and to talk to that person. And depending on what your relationship is, if they're somebody that you're a manager for or a leader for on a team, maybe that's an opportunity where you can have a discussion around prioritization, or which work is high impact, or maybe areas where that person needs to put something aside for the moment so they can balance that, or even just letting them know that you support them making those decisions about balancing the work that they have, or helping them decide what requires the most of their focus. And it's also a good listening tool for you to gauge sort of the capacity of your team, and where they're at. And then if you're, let's say you're not a manager, it's a peer or a colleague, you can give them the same type of perspective about work prioritization. Maybe there's an opportunity to help. Maybe you can facilitate a networking conversation with somebody else who could help in that space. Maybe some of that work they're duplicating and they don't actually need to do. But unless you dig in and you ask that question and you sort of go a little bit deeper than just letting it pass as something that everybody says, then you're never going to know, and you're never going to get to those conversations. So I think that's a great one to dig into. That can also be something that is on their personal side as well. They may be busy or stressed in aspects that are totally unrelated to their professional life, if it's a professional conversation. And there's obviously sort of a balance and a respect for privacy and what people want to share here. But it doesn't hurt to sort of broach that conversation and see what people are willing to share. And maybe there are similar things that you can do there. I mean, one, just being supportive and understanding that life happens and impacts who we are at work as well, can go a long way in building a relationship with someone. But maybe there's other accommodations or things that you could do that would be helpful to that person. And we'll talk about it later. I mean, maybe it's just having that shared experience about different, hardships and managing through that, to help form kind of a connection and support system for the person that you're talking to. Another interesting one is around sort of problem solving or supporting people with that. They're maybe in a situation where the outcomes are not what they hoped for. And this is one where I think the general sort of coaching technique, where you're sort of asking open-ended questions and trying to get that person to come to their own conclusions about solving their problem, can be helpful. So if you're sort of listening and aware for situations where maybe somebody's kind of outwardly asking for answers, but maybe an answer from you isn't the best response, just getting them to walk through and dig deeper and see, sort of what the actual problems that person is facing. Oftentimes what I find is once you get to that, they already know the solution or the outcome that they want. But for some reason, they're not able to execute on that. And usually that's just being held back by themselves for some reason. So if you can kind of go and uncover that and get them to work through how they can solve that problem, and then end up in a place where they have a solution or they have a path forward, but for whatever reason, they're hesitant to take that path, then I think it's at a good spot where you can sort of just make them aware of that, because even though they got to that conclusion, it may not be so obvious that they have the solution or they know what to do. So that's one that can help. And then two, sometimes you just need a nudge, and just like getting them to move forward. Say like, hey, it seems like you have a solution worked out to get the outcomes that you want. Why aren't you taking it? And, sometimes maybe exploring, okay, what's the worst possible thing that could happen if you try this solution? And, most of the time people have worked out rational things, and it's really not going to be that bad of an outcome if things don't go optimally. Maybe somebody will say no to them. That's usually the worst thing that can happen. And believe it or not, that can be fairly scary. The chance of that you kind of put yourself out there with something, somebody says no. Usually not the case, but that's often kind of the worst outcome that we're facing when we're afraid to try some of these new things, or to ask someone for help, or to try and solve a problem. So that can be helpful to kind of just frame it in that regard, where it can take some of the scariness out of the decision for the person that you're working with. Another good clue to look for is pieces of quiet within the conversation. If somebody is choosing their words carefully about a particular topic, that may give you some information. So let's say you're a manager and you're talking to one of your direct reports about something, and they're working on a project with somebody else, and or a couple people on the team, and they talk about a few people, and that's sort of straightforward and easy. And then you get to somebody else, maybe where you might think or that there's a performance concern or something like that, and they're very carefully picking their words about it because they don't want to throw their colleague under the bus. That could be some information there that is being transferred to you without explicitly being said verbally. Also, just that kind of hesitancy in general may mean that there's something sort of beyond the immediate answer. So if you're talking to somebody and a topic comes up and they pause and then they respond with sort of just an answer that doesn't really provide much detail, there may be an opportunity and an invitation to kind of probe deeper and see what's there, because likely there's more under the surface if they gave you the short answer, but it took them, a 30-second pause to get there. So I think that's a good clue to look for as well. You can also sort of monitor yourself and see how you're doing that in different situations. Sometimes you can do that for effect as well if you're trying to, convey thinking about something, or maybe to convey some information that you don't want to say explicitly, but your silence or your pause or sort of your thoughtfulness about it can convey that information as well. So it's a tool that can be used both ways. Another interesting one is people asking for feedback, and usually that's, or often anyway, that's for people that are just sort of looking for reaffirmation. They're doing a good job. Oftentimes I see this, with high performers as well, right? Like everything is going well. They're having, a significant impact. They're doing everything that they should be. But it's still important to hear that, especially from a manager and a leader, that you recognize that and you see that. So often sort of an ask for feedback may really be just an ask for confirmation of your affirmation and that things are going the right way. And maybe there is other feedback they can give at that time as well, which is totally fine. But often it's important to recognize that as an ask for affirmation, as opposed to just saying, no, I don't have any feedback. So then, going back to sort of one of the earlier topics about, people sharing struggles that they have, or problems or blockers or things that they're facing, be it professional or personal. This is where sort of your vulnerability, either as a leader or a peer, comes into play, where we can build that trust and that shared connection by being able to open up a bit about ourselves. And you're not going to necessarily have faced the same problems or even the same types of problems as everybody that you ever talk to. But we all face problems and challenges in life, and finding the right way to share those can help support people, create that connection, and help open up the conversation to deeper levels of what's really going on and how you can move forward and solve some of these problems, or support that person, or accomplish a business goal that you're working for. One of the quotes from the book that I liked a lot was, when you open up, they get drawn in. So the more that you're able to open up, and again, I'll caveat, right? Like there's professional boundaries for this, and it's probably more of an art than a science. But this is a tool that you can use to build this connection, to build this trust, to kind of have the shared humanity with the people that you work with, and finding ways where you can connect with them and be supportive, and just knowing that some of your colleagues, or especially a leader or a manager, has faced or is facing similar challenges to you, can make you feel a lot less alone in the world, which makes it easier to take on those challenges. Also, part of vulnerability, especially as a leader, as a manager, is being comfortable, not having all the answers, saying that you don't necessarily know the answer to particular problems or things, or how to solve all of these things. And I think that's also helpful, sort of going back to the coaching conversation, where instead of having either people you mentor or people you manage directly come to you for all the answers, which is a single point of failure. It may not be the right answers anyway. If they know that you don't know everything and you're open about that and you don't try and give an answer to every problem, that's going to encourage a more, autonomous and independent group where, yes, of course, they're going to want to talk through challenges and things with you, but ultimately, you're not the ultimate arbiter of truth in the world. And sometimes you have to explicitly say that to people, especially if you have, a lot more seniority or more experience or things like that. People won't necessarily assume that. They assume that they don't know and you know. So it's a good opportunity to make it explicit. And then kind of, the last piece on this is, and the book has some good suggestions on this, is finding ways to ask deeper questions, and kind of find natural ways to get into that conversation where you're able to share a bit about yourself and open up and be vulnerable, build some of that connection. So then you can be more clear and more direct in your communication or what's really going on if there's something deeper than the surface level. So, for example, as opposed to asking somebody, hey, what do you do for work? Getting into things like, hey, what drew you into this field, or what was your inspiration for it, or what in your life brought you here? Essentially, questions around what you do as a profession, but ask in very different ways, where one is really not going to lead you anywhere in an in-depth conversation, and the other one is an opportunity to get to know each other better. So there's some really good examples about doing that in the book. And then last, I'll just leave a couple other tips that I would recommend about how to sort of approach communicating with other people in a professional context, or even just in general. Making sure to leave space in the conversation for responses. So we talked about this looping behavior, and it's kind of a dance back and forth as the conversation participants get aligned. And in order for that dance to happen equally and for information to be shared reciprocally, and for everybody to get what they want out of that conversation, usually everybody needs a chance to talk and go back and forth and align. And if one person finds himself talking for an extended period of time, it turns into, more of a lecture or teaching a lesson or something like that, or presenting content, which might be appropriate, but it's not really a conversation in the same sense of what we're talking about. And I do sometimes see that happen. So I think that's good to try and be aware of. And if that's something or a habit that you feel yourself falling into, then just try and remind yourself, or have some techniques that, you sort of keep an eye on how long you're talking or somebody else's reaction, having video on and things like that. Or if you're in person, looking at their body language and things like that, if they're staying engaged or if their eyes are kind of glazing over as you talk on, and using that as a signal to maybe take a break, even if you haven't gotten through everything that you wanted to say. And then time management in general is really important in conversations, especially in a professional context. If you have a limited amount of time with someone, monitoring where you are in that time frame and time limit within the conversation itself. So are you going to be able to get to all the topics that you want? Are you leaving enough time to get back and forth on what you're talking about? Or are you just talking and then it's going to run out of time and you're not going to accomplish things? And this can be hard to do as well, right? You're trying to monitor many different things at the same time, the actual conversation, how much time you have, all these clues and signals, body language, things like that. So it can be a lot. And, again, you can use other tools. You can set like a timer for part of it. You could write out your notes about what topics you want to talk to and maybe put some timings there. But again, these are two kind of practical issues that I sometimes see people run into. And even if somebody else in the conversation is aware of it, it can be difficult to override somebody else that's talking in a polite way. So even in a professional context, it can be hard to do. So there you go. Hopefully that was helpful. Communication is such a big thing in getting to clarity, driving business success, making people feel heard, included, building trust so that you can understand what's really happening in an organization. So I hope it was helpful. Check out Supercommunicators. There's a bunch of other great books on communication, and I hope it helps you in your personal and professional journeys. So until next time, take care.